bills in tons and shiploads. Its market value in Papeete, in San Francisco, in Marseilles, until the stately trees which gave it lost for a time their old significance. Talk, too, of coconut oil and its richness in butter fat. Butter fat! There was a word to bring one back to a workaday world. To meet it at the outset of a long dreamed of journey was disheartening. It followed me with the shrill insistence of a creamery whistle, and I came very near giving up my plans altogether. Nordhoff did not change his. He said that it was silly, no doubt, but he didn't like the idea of wandering, however lonely, in a cloud of butter-fat islands. Therefore we said good-bye, having arranged for a rendezvous at a distant date, and set out on diverging paths. I ought to leave Crichton, the English planter, out of this story altogether. He doesn't belong in a commonplace record of travel such as this one set out to be. He had very little to do with the voyage of the Caleb S. Winship among the atolls. But when I think of that vessel he comes invariably into mind. I see him sitting on the cabin deck, with his freckled brown hands clasped about his knees, looking across a solitude of waters. And in my mental concept of the low archipelago he is always somewhere in the background, standing on the sun-stricken reef of a tiny atoll, his back to the sea, almost as much a part of the lonely picture as the sea itself. But one can't be wholly matter-of-fact in writing of these islands. They are not real in the ordinary sense, but belong rather to the realm of the imagination, and it is only in the imagination that you can conceive of your ever having been there, once you are back again in a well-plowed sea-track. As for the people, whether native or alien, in order to focus them in a world of reality, it is necessary to remember what they said or did, what they ate, what sort of clothing they wore. Otherwise they elude you, just as the islands do. This point of view isn't perhaps commonly held among the few white men who know them. Captains of small schooners, managers of trading companies, resident agents, whose interest, as I have said, is in what they produce rather than what they are. As one old skipper of my acquaintance put it, in speaking of the atolls, take them by and large, they are as much alike as the reef points on that sail. Findlay's South Pacific Directory, a supposedly competent authority, bears him out in this. They are all of similar character, adding for emphasis, no doubt, and they exhibit very great sameness in their features. He does, however, make certain slight concessions to what may be his own private conception of their peculiar fascination. This vast collection of coral islands, one of the wonders of the Pacific, and later in his account of them, the native name Paumotu signifies a cloud of islands, an expressive term. But he doesn't forget that he is writing for practical-minded mariners, who want facts and not fancies, however truthful these may be to reality. Now there's Tikehau, one of them said to me before I had been out there. That's a small atoll, and Raiatea, sort of square-like, and so on. Some with passes and a good anchorage inside the lagoon. Others you got to lay outside and take your cargo off the reef in a small boat. But to go back to Crichton, no one knew who he was or where he came from. The manager of the Inter-Island Trading Company had lived in Papeete for years, and had never seen him until the day when he turned up at the waterfront, trundling a wheelbarrow loaded with 4 crates of chickens and an odd lot of plantation tools and fishing tackle. Following him were 2 native boys carrying a weather-blackened sea-chest, and an old woman with an enormous roll of bedding tied loosely in a pandanus mat. That was about an hour before the schooner weighed anchor. He stacked his gear neatly on the beach and then went on board, asking for passage to Tanao. "No, sir," the manager said in telling about it afterward. "I never laid eyes on him until that moment, and I don't know anyone who had. Where's he been hiding himself, and why in the name of common sense does he want to go to Tanao? There's no copra or pearl shell there, not enough anyway to make it worth a man's while going after it." Tino, the supercargo, was equally puzzled. "I know Tanao from the sea," he said. "Passed it once coming down from the Marquesas. when I was supercargo of the Tire Tahiti. We were blown out of our course by a young hurricane. Didn't land. There's no one on the God-forsaken place. Now here's this Englishman, or Dane, or Norwegian, whatever he is, asking to be set down there with 4 crates of chickens, with an old Kanaka woman for company. He shook his head with a give-it-up expression, adding a moment later, "Well, you meet some queer people down in this part of the world. I don't believe in asking them their business, but it beats me sometimes trying to figure out what their business is." He was not able to figure it out in this case. The old woman was talkative, but the information he gathered from her only stimulated his curiosity the more. She owned Tanao, an atom of an atoll, miles out of the beaten track even of the Paumotu schooners. There had never been more than a score of people living on it, he said, and now there was no one. Crichton had taken a long lease on it, and was going out there, as he told me afterward, to do my writing and thinking undisturbed. I didn't know this until later, however. When I first heard him spoken of we were only a few hours out from Papeete. We had left the harbor with a light breeze, but at 4 in the afternoon the schooner was lying about 15 miles offshore, lazy jacks flapping against idle sails with a mellow, crusty sound. After a good deal of fretting at the fickleness of land breezes, talk had turned to Crichton, who was up forward somewhere looking after his chickens. I didn't pay much attention then to what was being said, for I had just had one of those moments which come rarely enough in a lifetime, but which make up for all the arid stretches of experience. They give no forewarning. There comes a flood of happiness, which brings tears to the eyes. The sense of it is so keen. The sad part of it is that one refuses to accept it as a moment. You say, "By Jove, I'm not going to let this pass." And it has gone, as unaccountably as it came, half lost through foreboding of its end. One prepares for it unknowingly, I suppose, through months, sometimes years, of longing for something remote and beautiful, such as these islands, for example. And when you have your islands, the moment comes, sooner or later, and you see them in a light which never was, as the saying goes, but which is the light of truth for all that. Brief as it is, no one can say that the reward isn't ample, and it leaves an afterglow in the memory, tempting regret, fading very slowly, which one never wholly loses, since it takes on the color of memory itself, becoming a part of that dim world of worthwhile illusions, all of which has very little to do with what was passing aboard the Caleb S. Winship, except that I was prevented from taking an immediate interest in my fellow passengers. But this being my first near view of a Polynesian trading schooner, the scene on deck had all the charm of the unusual. Our skipper was a Paumotuan, a former pearl diver, and the sailors, 6 of them, including the mate, Tahitian boys. In addition to these were Crichton, the planter, the supercargo, master of 3 major languages and a half-dozen Polynesian dialects, the manager of the Inter-Island Trading Company, William, the engineer, Oro, the cabin boy, a Chinese cook, and 2 Chinese storekeepers, evidence of the leisurely, persistent Oriental invasion of French Polynesia. 30 native passengers, a horse in an improved stall amidships, a monkey perched in the mainmast rigging, Crichton's 4 crates of chickens, and 5 pigs. In addition to the passengers and livestock, we were carrying out a cargo of lumber, corrugated iron, flour, rice, sugar, canned goods, clothing, and dry goods. Each of the native passengers brought with him as much dunnage as an Englishman carries when he goes traveling, and his food for the voyage: limes, oranges, bananas, breadfruit, mangoes, canned meat. With all of this, a 2 months' supply of gasoline for the engines, and fresh water and green coconuts for the passengers and crew. We made a snug fit. Even the space under the patient little native horse was used to stow his fodder for the long journey. The women, with one exception, were barefooted, bareheaded, but otherwise conventionally dressed according to European or American standards. This, I suppose, is an outrageous betrayal of a trade secret, if one may say that writers of South Sea narratives belong to a trade. Those seriously interested in the islands have, of course, known the truth about them for years, but I believe it is still a popular misconception that the women who inhabit them, no one seems